The night the sky turned the color of old copper. Jonah Blackthorn heard a sound he hadn't heard in 7 years, knuckles on wood. Wind drove ash across the high mesa, rattling juniper branches against his shutters. Somewhere down in the gulch, dry lightning had kicked a grass fire into a moving wall of ember and smoke. Folks with sense were riding hard for the river. Jonah, who'd abandoned the habit of running from anything, sat at his table stitching a torn saddle skirt when the knocking came again. Not neighborly, not timid, urgent, like someone had set their last hope on a stranger's door. No one came to the Blackthorn claim. Not since winter took his wife and the town took the rest. Jonah reached for the Spencer rifle propped against the hutch, then stopped halfway. Through the door, he heard more than one voice. Women, breathless and raw-throated from the smoke. A language he didn't speak flowed between them, broken by a few words of English shaped carefully, like a person testing a step in the dark. "Help," a voice called. "Please." 7 years was a long time to practice silence. Jonah set the needle down and crossed the room on boot soles that remembered every loose plank. He didn't draw the bolt. Not yet. Firelight threw his shadow long across the floorboards as he leaned close enough to feel heat bleeding through the oak. The women were on his porch, wrapped in soot and road dust and something else Jonah recognized from his own mirror. The stubborn look of people too tired to bend. "Who's after you?" he asked, voice low. A beat. Then, "Riders from Copper Ridge. Company men." Not soldiers then. Worse some days. Mining guards who weren't bound by the rules they wore on their sleeves. "What for?" The answer came from a different voice. Steadier, closer. "Because we would not leave our canyon. Because we carry proof." Proof. Jonah glanced toward the shelf where a tin of percussion caps sat beside a folded news sheet about a survey line no one in town could explain. Copper Ridge had been buying land with paper and fire for months. If these women had something that could stop it, men with torches would be right behind them. He slid the bolt, and the door opened to a gust that smelled like scorched sage. 9 women stood clustered on the threshold, clothes torn, cheeks streaked with ash. The tallest, her black hair bound with a strip of smoke-gray cloth, met his gaze without blinking. A leather satchel hung crossbody, buckled tight. The youngest cradled a swaddled child whose breath came in fast, shallow sips. Another woman pressed a blood-stained scarf to her shoulder, jaw set against the pain. "I'm Nia Tallbird," the tall one said. "These are my kin. We need water, and a door that shuts." "Inside," Jonah said, stepping back. Heat and human breath changed the room in an instant. Jonah hauled the water crock onto the table, handed out tin cups, and wet a rag for the child. Nia loosened the satchel only enough to pull a folded packet sealed with red wax. She didn't open it. Didn't need to. The shape of a survey map showed through the paper like a ghost. "They moved the line," she said. "Stole half our valley with ink. We took this from their pay wagon. The guards want it back." "Where?" Jonah asked. Nia angled her chin toward the window. 3 miles, maybe less. The wind hides us, but the fire lights the whole mesa." Jonah lifted the shutter just enough to slice the night. Smoke smeared the stars. Downslope, lanterns pricked the darkness. Too steady to be fireflies, too many to be chance. The company men were spreading out, riding fast, their silhouettes jumping in and out of the smoke like figures in a lantern show. "You can hide in the storm cellar," Jonah said. "Stone walls, cool air." Nia shook her head once. "If they find us in your ground, they burn your house with us in it and call it an accident. If we run, they chase us to the water and drown the truth there. We need a third road." Jonah hadn't used the word "we" for a long time. It came back like a tool he'd oiled and set aside. "The cistern spillway," he said, pointing toward the back pasture. Tight ravine, single horse wide. If we make them think we're fleeing that way, we can turn them into it and shut the gate behind them. Naya studied him, reading the old fight in his eyes the way a farrier reads a hoof. You know their kind. I know men who think a deed makes them gods, Jonah said. He looked at the map packet, then at the half-sleeping child. And I know what fire takes when nobody stands up to it. Outside, a cowbell clanged once. Jonah's trip line by the eastern fence, then twice, faster. The riders had reached his boundary and found a wire where there hadn't been any yesterday. Good. Let them puzzle on it. Naya drew a bone-handled knife and nodded to her sisters. Ash's dull eyes sharpened. A woman who'd said nothing yet slipped a slingshot from her belt. Another checked the knot on a length of cord spiked with fishhooks. Refugees, the company men would say. Jonah saw something else, a plan blooming inside the ruin. He blew out the lamp, and the room fell to ember light. Time to choose, he said. Your map, my land, their greed, and a gate that only closes once. The smoke crawled low across the mesa, a crawling beast that turned breath into poison. Jonah moved through it, like a man wading through ghosts. Behind him, the women followed in single file, their shapes half vanished by the ash storm. Every few steps, Naya glanced back to be sure the youngest, Tali, the girl with the baby, was keeping pace. The child had gone quiet, too quiet, and that frightened Jonah more than the glow on the horizon. They reached the spillway as the first bullets cracked in the distance. The company riders had found his empty cabin, the door swinging in the wind, the poker still red in the hearth. Jonah had left it that way on purpose. From a distance, it looked like panic, a rushed escape, a trail easy to follow. That was what he wanted them to believe. Down there, he said, crouching by the old sluice gate that marked the ravine's edge. The narrow trench cut deep into the clay, lined with wooden braces that hadn't been used since the drought. Jonah had built it years ago to drain the flash floods. Now it would drain something else. Naya peered over the edge. You sure they'll take the bait? They'll take whatever they think bleeds, Jonah said. Men like that don't stop when they smell fear. He pointed to the ridge above them, where two of the women, silent, precise, were already setting lanterns behind the rocks. When lit, they'd look like moving torches, a perfect illusion of fugitives scrambling for cover. Once those lights start moving, they'll follow the trail straight into this cut. It narrows in the middle. Only one can ride through at a time. And when they do, Jonah showed her the bundle in his hand. 2 sticks of dynamite wrapped tight with twine, fuse coiled like a snake. We drop the mouth behind them. Clay falls, blocks the way out. Then we take the high ridge and make sure nobody walks away with your map. Naya studied him for a moment, the storm's reflection burning red in her eyes. You've done this before. Not proud of it, Jonah said. But knowing how to destroy a thing is sometimes the only way to keep it safe. A shout echoed from the direction of the cabin. Then another. Horses screamed, wild and frightened. Jonah could almost see it in his mind. The riders fanning out, circling the porch, finding the note he'd left tacked to the doorpost. There's nothing left to take. They're moving, one of the women hissed from the ridge. Jonah lit the first lantern, its glow small against the darkness, and waved them on. The illusion began. From afar, it must have looked like a desperate line of women running for their lives. The riders would chase the light, because men like that always chased what they thought was weaker than themselves. Then came the thunder of hooves, muffled by dust but growing louder. Closer. Jonah and Naya ducked behind a boulder as the first shadowed figures galloped down into the ravine. Their shouts were eager, their laughter sharp. Naya's jaw clenched. They think we're afraid. Let them keep thinking it, Jonah murmured. He touched the fuse to his lantern, the flame biting down the cord with a hiss. The ground shuddered when the charge went off. A sound like the mountain itself exhaling rolled down the ravine. Clay walls buckled inward, burying the riders beneath a wave of dirt and splintered wood. The echo carried across the mesa and vanished into the night wind. When the dust cleared, silence filled the trench. An awful, final kind of silence. Naya stood still, knife in hand, her expression unreadable. "How many?" "Enough," Jonah said. He hated how steady his own voice sounded. But some always survive. As if summoned by the words, a single gunshot cracked from below. A bullet sparked against the boulder beside them. Then another. Shadows were crawling up the slope, 2, maybe 3 men. Coughing, half buried, still alive enough to fight. Jonah raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel, and fired. One figure fell backward into the dust. The others scrambled for cover. Naya moved beside him, blade glinting. "They'll circle wide," she said. "Try to come up from behind." "Then we don't give them time." They advanced together down the slope, the smell of burnt powder and earth heavy in the air. Below them, a wounded rider dragged himself free of the rubble, his leg bent wrong, his pistol trembling in his hand. "Please," he gasped. "Orders, they said—" Naya's knife flashed once. The words died with him. She didn't look at Jonah as she wiped the blade clean on the man's sleeve. "Mercy is for those who show it first," she said quietly. Jonah couldn't argue. The fire behind them was spreading, painting the sky in red arcs. It was only a matter of time before the next patrol came. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll come looking when their riders don't return." Naya turned toward the north, where the smoke thinned and the horizon flickered with cold stars. "Then we go before the fire does. There's an old mission 3 miles past the ridge. Stone walls, deep well. If we reach it, we can rest before dawn." Jonah checked the rifle again and glanced at the map packet still clutched in her hand. "And after dawn?" Naya looked back once at the ravine, at the broken men who had hunted her people for gold and silence. "After dawn," she said, "we take this map to someone who still remembers what truth looks like." Then she started walking, the others falling in behind her. Jonah hesitated only a moment before following. Because the truth was, he no longer knew whether he was helping them survive, or whether they were teaching him how to live again. By the time the first stars dimmed, the fire behind them was a red scar crawling across the valley. Jonah and the women moved through the charred sagebrush in silence, the baby whimpering softly against Tali's chest. The smoke had thinned, but every breath still tasted of iron. The old mission, if it truly stood where Naya remembered, was their only chance before daylight exposed them to whatever search party Copper Ridge would send next. Jonah walked ahead, rifle ready, boots sinking into blackened soil. Each step stirred the ash into little ghosts. Naya followed close behind, carrying the satchel with the stolen map pressed tight to her side. "You sure this place is still standing?" Jonah asked without turning. Naya's voice was hoarse but steady. "My grandmother spoke of it, built by priests before the mines came. They left when the wells dried, but the walls are stone. Fire won't take stone, neither will bullets," Jonah muttered. Behind them, 2 of the older women stumbled, coughing from smoke. Jonah slowed, offering an arm. They refused with quiet dignity, leaning on each other instead. Tough people, he thought. Too tough to have been hunted like animals. They crested a low ridge, and there it was. A silhouette of worn arches, half buried in dust. Moonlight catching the broken bell tower. The mission looked deserted, but Jonah didn't trust stillness. He raised a hand, signaling everyone to stop. "Stay here," he said. "If anyone's inside, I'll flush them out first." He slipped into the courtyard like a shadow. The old gate hung open, hinges squealing in the wind. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old incense and bat droppings. Jonah checked each corner, the rifle following his eyes. Barracks empty, chapel burned, pews stacked like bones. But under the cracked altar, something caught his attention. Boot prints. Fresh ones. He crouched and touched the dirt, still soft. Someone had been here hours ago. A whisper from the entrance. Jonah? He raised a hand for silence, then pointed to the tracks. Naya's eyes hardened. We're not alone. The baby stirred and whimpered. Jonah cursed under his breath. They'll hear that from a mile off. Then we move fast, Naya said. They filed inside, sweeping what debris they could into a rough barricade. Jonah found a side chamber with a narrow slit of a window, good for a lookout. He peered through it and froze. Lanterns. 3, maybe 4, moving slowly through the smoke. Men on foot. Scouts. They're tracking us, Jonah said. The company didn't waste time. Naya pulled her knife, but he shook his head. Too far for blades. We let them come close, then take the first one quiet. Minutes passed like hours. Then a shadow crossed the window. A man stepped into the courtyard, rifle slung carelessly, whistling low. Jonah watched his boots crunch the gravel. He was young, face smeared with soot. Maybe a lookout too green to know better. Jonah moved before thought could stop him. One hand clamped the man's mouth, the other drove the rifle butt into his ribs. The body sagged silently. He dragged the scout behind a broken pillar and checked his pockets. Water flask, matches, a folded telegram. He handed it to Naya. She read quickly, frowning. It's from Copper Ridge headquarters. Recover the map at all cost. Reinforcements en route from Junction Gulch by sunrise. Jonah did the math. Junction Gulch was 15 miles east, an hour by horse. We've got until dawn. And then, one of the women asked, then we'll have an army on our backs. The baby cried again, louder this time. Tali tried to hush her, but the wail cut through the silence like a flare. Outside, the lantern stopped moving. Voices whispered. They heard, Jonah said. Positions now. The next moments were chaos. A gunshot shattered the quiet, bullets pinging off stone. The women scattered behind columns and rubble. Jonah fired once, hitting a shadow in the courtyard. 2 more shots answered. Sparks leapt from the stone arch above him. Back inside the chapel, he shouted. Barricade the door. They fell back, dragging the wounded scout's body to block the entrance. Jonah reloaded, counting cartridges. 7 left. Smoke drifted through the broken windows, stinging his eyes. Naya crouched beside him. If they breach the walls, we're finished. Jonah looked up at the cracked ceiling. Not yet we're not. He remembered the cistern beneath the mission. A wide, hollow tank, once used to store rainwater. If they could draw the attackers close and ignite the oil lamps down there, the explosion would turn the courtyard into a furnace. But it would also destroy the only shelter they had left. Naya saw the thought in his eyes. You'll bring the roof down on us. Better ashes than chains, he said. Another volley struck the walls, scattering dust. A bullet grazed his sleeve. Jonah ducked and called out, They're lining up for a push. Then we finish this before they do, Naya said. She passed him the stolen map. If we fall, burn it. Don't let them take it. Jonah stared at the folded paper. It didn't look like much, just lines and ink. But men had already died for it. He tucked it into his coat. We're not falling tonight. He grabbed a lantern and kicked open the trap door to the cistern. The smell of oil and stagnant water rose up. Everyone to the far wall, he ordered. Outside, boots pounded closer, shouts echoing. Jonah lowered the lantern into the dark hole, fuse already burning slow. When I say run, you run for the north gate. Don't look back." "Jonah," Naya said quietly, "you come too." He gave a small, crooked smile. "I always meant to see what sunrise looked like from the other side of fear." Then he let go of the lantern. The explosion tore through the mission like thunder breaking its chains. The walls cracked, the roof caved, and fire roared into the night. Men screamed as the blast flung them backward, swallowed by smoke and stone. When the dust settled, the north gate stood open. Naya and the survivors stumbled into the pre-dawn cold, the baby wailing but alive. Behind them, the mission burned, painting the sky in orange and gold. And through the fire's light, Naya saw Jonah still standing in the ruins, rifle in hand, guarding their escape until the last echo of gunfire died. Then the smoke swallowed him. Morning crept over dry mesa with the gentleness of something afraid to be seen. The fire had died to a whisper, thin ribbons of smoke curling from what had been the mission's bell tower. Crows circled overhead, silent and patient. Naya stood among the blackened stones, her hair stiff with soot. The others were resting in a shallow arroyo a mile north, too weak to move farther. She'd come back alone, though Jonah had told her not to. Or maybe he hadn't needed to. She could still hear his voice in her mind, steady, dry, infuriatingly calm. "Go north. Don't waste what we bought." But she couldn't leave a man like that to burn unseen. The chapel was unrecognizable. Stones split open from the heat, beams twisted like old bones. Naya picked her way through the wreckage, careful where she placed her feet. Every so often, something crackled under the ash. Spent cartridges, charred wood, a half-melted tin cross. Then she saw him. Jonah sat slumped against a half-standing wall, one leg pinned by rubble. The rifle lay across his lap. His coat was blackened, but his chest still moved, shallow but certain. When she crouched beside him, his eyes opened, gray and sharp as ever. "Figured you'd come back," he said. His voice was smoke rough. "Never met a tall bird who could leave a thing half-finished." "You're alive," she breathed. "Mostly." He winced as she lifted the stone trapping his leg. "That's going to be ugly later. You shouldn't have stayed. Someone had to make sure the company men didn't follow." He nodded toward the field beyond the ruins. There, among the smoldering sage, lay the shapes of the fallen, miners and hired guns, half buried in their own greed. "You did this," she whispered. He shook his head. "We did this. You lit the fire long before I struck a match." Naya smiled faintly. "You talk like a preacher who stopped believing." "I did once." His eyes drifted to the cracked altar beside them. "My wife used to say the same thing about me. Said I was a man who could fix anything but himself." "What happened to her?" Jonah's silence stretched long enough that Naya thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke quietly, almost to the air. "There was a flood. We were working a valley north of here, rail survey. The company wanted a dam built quick, cheap. I told them the foundations weren't sound. They said build it anyway. When it gave out, half the camp washed away. My wife and boy were downstream." He drew a shaky breath. "The company blamed the storm. Sent me a week's pay and a bottle of whiskey to forget with." Naya lowered her eyes. "So that's why you stayed alone all those years." He gave a faint, humorless laugh. "Solitude's cheaper than guilt. Or it was, until you and your people came along." The wind shifted, carrying a faint cry from the arroyo. The baby, awake again. Jonah turned his head toward the sound, a flicker of something almost gentle in his eyes. "That child will grow up in a world better than this, if you're half as stubborn as you look." Naya straightened. "Then you'll help us get her there." He gestured to his leg. "You planning on carrying me?" "If I have to." She tore a strip from her sleeve and began binding the wound. He didn't protest, though each pull of the cloth made him grit his teeth. "You shouldn't risk it," he muttered. "If the company sends more men." "They won't," she said. "Not yet. They'll be counting bodies till noon." Jonah studied her face, the soot and the quiet ferocity in her eyes. "You're not like any woman I've met. Because I carry a knife? Because you carry a cause," he said. "Most people trade those for comfort. You turned yours into armor." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Armor still rusts if no one remembers why it was forged." The sun broke through the smoke then, spilling pale gold over the ruins. Jonah squinted against it. "You talk like someone who should be leading more than 10 souls. 10's enough," she said. 10 who remember the truth are harder to kill than 100 who forget it." He smiled faintly. "Remind me not to argue with you when I can walk again." "Good," she said, looping his arm over her shoulder. "Because right now, you're walking." They limped out of the ruins together, step by painful step, until the mission was a gray shape behind them. Naya didn't look back. She'd learned long ago that fire was meant to burn what needed burning. Halfway to the arroyo, Jonah spoke again, quieter now. "You think that map's enough to bring them down?" Naya's expression hardened. "It's not the map. It's the proof that the land they stole sits on sacred water. They'll lose everything if the world sees it. And if the world doesn't care, then we make it care," she said. "You know how to build things, Jonah. Help me build something that lasts longer than hate." He said nothing for a long time. Then he nodded once. "All right. But after that, I'm finding a place without fire or guns." "You'll be bored within a week," she said. And for the first time, he laughed. Hoarse, broken, but alive. When they reached the arroyo, the women looked up in disbelief. Tali dropped to her knees, clutching the baby tight. "You found him?" "No," Naya said, glancing down at Jonah. "He found himself." The wind carried the last smoke of the mission eastward, toward the copper mines that still gleamed like wounds in the distance. And as the group began to move north again, toward water, toward safety, toward whatever future dared wait for them, Jonah Blackthorn took one final look back. The ashes didn't seem like loss anymore. They looked like soil, dark, rich, ready to grow something new. By the third day, the wind had changed. The smoke no longer chased them north. It drifted east, toward Copper Ridge, like a messenger carrying the evidence of what the company had done. The mountains ahead grew sharper, blue against the horizon. Between them ran the Black River, swollen with spring melt. If they could cross before the riders regrouped, they'd reach tribal territory, land the company couldn't touch without starting a war it couldn't afford. Jonah walked with a limp, using a branch for a crutch. The wound on his leg was healing poorly, but his mind had found new purpose. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about hiding from the world. He was thinking about how to face it. The group stopped at a ridge overlooking the river. Below, the water flashed in the sunlight, fierce and alive. Naya pointed to a narrow span of rock that jutted across the torrent like a broken tooth. "The crossing," she said. "After that, the canyon bends west. We'll be safe." Jonah studied the path, his brow furrowed. "Maybe. But safe's a word that lies easy. You think the men who run Copper Ridge give up after one defeat? They'll follow us with more paper than bullets next time. Laws, deeds, signatures that steal what they can't take by gun." Naya met his gaze. "Then we make their lies visible." She unbuckled the satchel, pulling out the folded survey map. It was filthy now, stained with smoke and blood, but still legible. She laid it across a flat stone. "This shows where they moved the boundary lines, where they buried the water rights and claimed the valley. If we reach Fort Dalton, the magistrate there can expose them. Jonah gave a grim smile. You're betting on a man behind a desk to do what bullets couldn't. I'm betting on truth, she said simply. The air split with a gunshot. The paper fluttered as the bullet struck the stone beside it. Jonah yanked Naya down as a second shot ricocheted off the rock. On the far slope, riders were pouring out of the tree line. 5, 6, maybe more. Not company guards this time. Uniforms, federal marshals, by the look of their badges catching the light. They've found us, Jonah hissed. The group scattered for cover. Naya dragged the map to her chest as bullets tore into the dirt. One of the older women fell, clutching her arm, but kept crawling toward a boulder. Jonah fired back once, twice, then ducked behind a fallen log as a round grazed his shoulder. From below, a voice boomed. This is Marshal Duncan of Junction Gulch. Lay down your arms. You're accused of sabotage, arson, and treason against the Copper Ridge Mining Company. Treason? Jonah spat. Since when did greed wear a badge? They're company men in uniform, Naya said through her teeth. Bought justice. Jonah's eyes flicked to the river, then to the dynamite strapped to his pack. If they want to chase ghosts, we'll give them a haunting. He passed her the map. Take the others and go downriver. There's an old ferry crossing 2 miles west. Follow the current. I'll slow them down. Naya gripped his wrist. No more dying for me, Jonah. He shook his head. Not for you. For proof. He tapped the satchel. You carry their crimes. I'll make sure they can't bury them again. Before she could argue, he was already moving, limping but fast, toward the bluff. Gunfire followed him, tearing through the brush. He ducked behind a ridge, pulled a fuse, and set one of the charges. His hands were steady, calm. He'd built his life on stone and iron. Now he'd end the same way, shaping the land one last time. When the fuse burned low, he shouted over his shoulder, "Run!" Naya hesitated only a second before obeying. She led the others down the slope, following the roar of the river. The map clutched tight against her chest. Behind them, the explosion cracked open the earth. Dust and fire swallowed the ridge, and the sound rolled across the valley like thunder remembering its duty. By the time they reached the ferry ruins, the sun was sinking. The women looked back and saw nothing but smoke rising behind them. He's gone, whispered Tali. No, Naya said quietly. He's finished what he started. They crossed on makeshift planks, pushing through the cold water until their feet found the opposite bank. Exhausted but alive, they climbed into the shelter of the pines. At dawn, 2 riders appeared on the far side of the river, marshals scanning the banks. Naya held her breath as they dismounted, cursing at the destroyed trail. Then they turned back, retreating the way they came. The explosion had done its work. Jonah Blackthorn was gone, and the path to freedom lay open. Days later, when they reached Fort Dalton, Naya handed the map to the magistrate herself. He listened to her testimony in silence, eyes widening as she unfolded the story. The dam, the fires, the moved boundaries, the massacre. When she finished, he looked down at the paper for a long moment and then stood. By law, he said, this is enough to indict every man tied to Copper Ridge. Naya didn't smile. Law has hands. Let's see if it also has a heart. Word spread. Investigators came. The company denied everything, but the map and the survivors spoke louder. Within months, Copper Ridge's mines were shut down, their deeds revoked. The land returned, scarred, but free. Naya and her people rebuilt near the river, planting cottonwoods where ashes once lay. Every spring, the floodwaters would rise, bringing new life to the valley. One evening, as she stood watching the current, a boy ran up, a messenger from the fort. Miss Talbert, he said breathlessly. They found something south of the mission ruins. A metal tag. Says, "Property of J. Blackthorn." Naya took it gently. The edges were burned, but the engraving was still clear. She smiled, tears tracing clean lines down her soot-stained cheeks. "He kept his promise," she whispered. The boy looked puzzled. Was he family? She shook her head. Something rarer than that. He was proof that the world still makes men worth remembering. The river murmured beside her, endless and alive. Somewhere beyond its bend, the wind moved through the ruins of the mission, carrying a whisper of smoke and iron, a sound like a man's voice fading into legend. Spring returned to the Black River Valley a year later. The scars of fire were still there, charcoal trees standing like sentinels, but between them, green shoots had taken hold. Naya Tallbird stood on the ridge above the new village, watching smoke rise from cook fires instead of gunpowder. Her people were rebuilding. The land was breathing again. Children played by the water, their laughter echoing against the canyon walls. Among them, the youngest, Tali's son, named Jonah, carried a wooden toy horse carved from blackened oak. He had never met the man he was named for, yet somehow carried the same stubborn tilt to his chin. Naya smiled faintly, then turned toward the narrow path leading upriver. She walked alone until the sounds of the village faded behind her. The trail wound through cottonwoods to the very bluff where Jonah Blackthorn had made his last stand. She hadn't returned here since that night. The earth had healed over the blast. Wildflowers grew in the cracks of the stone. Yet at the center of the clearing, half buried in soil, something glinted. She knelt and brushed the dirt aside. A tin canteen, battered, dented, but intact. Scratched into its side was a familiar mark. JB. Her breath caught. For a moment she thought it a ghost's relic. Then a voice spoke behind her, rough as gravel and familiar as thunder. "Never thought I'd see anyone water these weeds again." She turned slowly. He stood there, leaner, grayer, but alive. A faint limp, a cane of juniper wood, and a wry smile that could have belonged to no one else. Jonah Blackthorn. She took a step forward, hardly daring to believe. You were buried in that fire." "Almost," he said. "A piece of the mission's cistern didn't cave. Knocked me out, kept me alive. Spent a month half dead before a rancher found me downstream. Guess I'm harder to burn than I look." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Naya laughed, a deep, incredulous sound that startled a pair of birds from the trees. She punched his shoulder lightly. "You fool." He grinned. "You're the one who keeps running toward trouble. Guess we're both fools." They sat together on the ridge as the river moved below, glittering in the afternoon light. Jonah listened as she told him everything. The map, the trial, the mines shut down. The valley returned to its rightful people. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "So it worked," he said softly. "Truth beat the money for once." "It wasn't the truth that won," she said. "It was people who refused to stay silent." He nodded. "You found something to build. I guess I ought to see if I remember how to swing a hammer." She smiled. "We could use a stubborn builder who doesn't scare easy." The sound of the river filled the silence between them. Steady, eternal. Jonah looked out across the valley. "I spent half my life hiding from the world, thinking solitude was peace. Turns out peace was just the world waiting for me to come back." "And what will you do now?" Naya asked. "Help finish what we started." He said simply, "Build homes that don't burn, fences that don't divide, and a bridge that doesn't break in a storm." She extended her hand. "Then welcome home, Jonah Blackthorn." He took it. And for the first time since the fire, the man who had once lived only among ghosts felt the weight of life return to him. Stories like this one don't end when the fighting stops. They end when people remember why they fought. Jonah's journey wasn't about revenge or survival. It was about rediscovering humanity after losing faith in it. Naya's courage wasn't just rebellion. It was the insistence that justice only exists if someone keeps it alive. The land healed because they chose not to answer cruelty with more cruelty, but with truth, rebuilding, and mercy. And that is the quiet lesson buried beneath the gunfire. You can't burn what is rooted in compassion, and no man is truly lost as long as he still has the courage to do one more good thing.